Good evening, everyone. His Excellency Nabil Fahmy and Excellencies, members of the Board of Global Affairs and Public Policy, and ladies and gentlemen. You know, the biggest questions in any issue is a little bit always paradoxical. It starts from where we came from and where we are going. I mean, that is the beginning of all stories I know. And Egyptian beginning, it always goes with history. But I will not start with Minas, Narmer, and the unification of North and South Egypt. It will take some time. However, to sum it up, we have almost 3,000 years of glory and another 3,000 years of humiliation. Take or leave about 500 years, here and there. But the last really battle and stand-up made by an Egyptian king was in 186 BC in Aswan, when the last Egyptian army stood against the Ptolemies for a last losing war. However, after these 6,000 years, we are talking about 200 years of modernization. Again, I am not going to start with Muhammad Ali until the present. However, it is very important to say that the 200 years of modernization is a story of cycles, of progress ending in failure. Started with 1805 with Muhammad Ali and witnessed the kingdom and the republic. Despite many changes and progress that took us from the Middle Ages to modern times, we end every cycle behind in our ranking among nations. We are now into a new cycle. The starting point is 2 revolutions, January 25th, 2011, and January 13th, 2013. It is the beginning of the second decade of the 21st century. That's the so-called Arab Spring. Arab Spring in our region, in Egypt, is always full of sandstorms. What is this revolution we're all about is that the previous order could not continue anymore. And we were at the end of the cycle that started in the 23rd of July, 1952, that sparked the revolution against the monarchy and the British occupation. Now we are into a new cycle with 2 revolutions, 4 years after the last one, and during the time of elections for the president. My talk will be about these 4 years and probably the 4 years after. To talk about the 4 years, let me say that there are 3 major stories about these 4 years. The first story, I will call it the New Egypt story. The second one is the Republic of Fear story. And the third one is the Rabaa story. You might detect that the first one, the New Egypt story, is the State of Egypt story. It's coming from the roots of Egyptian nationalism and the armed forces of Egypt. Notice here, and I am now into the New Egypt story, that the army was called twice. The people and the army, one hand. That was the slogan that was raised during the January 2011 revolution. The people and the army are one hand, the savior from a religious fascist state by the second revolution. So the army was called twice by the people, by millions of the people. And it's true, by the way, because in Egypt and outside of Egypt, it depends where you are. I mean, if you are against the January Revolution, you will say it was not a revolution at all. There was no millions, and we start counting the squares, how much meter square can take people. They were. In terms of millions of people, they came out, whether they were 30 million or 25 million. The people came out, and by the end, by their time in the streets, they called the army to take over and make the change. The key words for the story, I mean, anyone will make a content analysis of the story, will find 3 words: security, stability, development. The challenges are terrorism and underdevelopment. The goal is high growth rate of 7 to 8% to overcome population increase and participate in the global race of competition among nations. Also, taking tough decisions of floating the currency, taking subsidies off the table, moving from the river to the sea, massive economic projects being guided by the IMF, and the result is almost all macroeconomic indicators are positive. I mean, you take unemployment, you take inflation, you take reserves, you take budget deficit, all are in the decline or rising. It depends on how positive it will be. Another or 3 major things also will come into the beef of this story. The one is the consolidation of national cohesion. I mean, everyone can notice the idea that it happened through this story, something that never happened before, that the president of Egypt will go to the Christian cathedral in order to attend, the mass of every year, and stay there and make it year after year after year. Nasser didn't do it, Saeed didn't do it, and many they didn't do it. So the idea of cohesion that happened between the Christian church and the Al-Azhar, I think it is unprecedented, at least in recent history. Another important one is how women is perceived in Egypt as part of the dynamics of whether politics or social life. Here the state by choice is really electing to ask women to be more participating, whether in parliament or in the cabinet. The numbers here are very indicative. There is something also important here, what I will call it the luck of nature. As we can weave it into the details of the story. The luck of nature is that all of a sudden, we found that we have plenty of oil and gas. The plenty of oil and gas happened by the state of nature in which the Nile Valley, the Nile River is just pushing water coming from Ethiopia and Sudan and carrying a lot of organic stuff to the Mediterranean Sea. Million years of combustion and pressures and heat, it produced gas. But there was politics in it and policies into it called to demarcate maritime borders between Egypt and Saudi Arabia and between Egypt and Cyprus. And all ends up, if someone interested to give more details, I would be happy to do it. But at the center of the story is that something lucky here, or probably blessed, that all of a sudden Egypt can be the center hub of regional energy policies and politics in the same time. So we have generally a very positive kind of a story about a new Egypt that is already growing last year by about 5.5%. That is, its major macroeconomic indicators are going on the positive side, that we are making stability and fight against, fascist regime, the Muslim Brothers, and also the terrorists of all kinds. And we are doing that alone. I mean, all the fighting against terrorism in the region happened to be coalition of NATO in the Iraq-Syria borders, or in Afghanistan until today. But Egypt is carrying the war alone. That is the story of a new Egypt, fighting for its soul from being a fascist religious country into being a country that's trying to get into the modern age. Here we got the Republic of Fear story. The Republic of Fear story is coming basically from Egyptian liberals and seconded by European and American liberals. And their representatives inside Egypt are human rights organizations. Egypt, I have to put things in perspective, got about 47,000 associations and groups and what's so-called civil society organizations. The human rights organizations, are all about 25 organizations. But they are highly amplified by Western liberals and organizations, plus savviness in the new technological innovations of social networks. For them, here it is another military rule doomed to failure. Here, there is a school among here, our sub-school is, just Mubarak's regime is coming back to power. Another sub-one, it is just the military, al-askar, or hukm al-askar. Big in the social network, Western media, but very marginal at home. Unfortunately, that is the case. I mean, although, there is amplification for these groups, when they tried getting into the parliament, for instance, actually their harvest was very meager. And until now, we don't have a comprehensive and detailed national program outside of complaints and description of the regime as Orwellian society, as the worst suppression of security we have faced, even surpassing the Mubarak era. We can find all the vocabulary that's related to a very suppressed and oppressed society, intellectuals, and then we come into the third story, the Rabaa story, which is a Muslim Brothers story. Here, the Muslim Brothers got a whole theory of, first, their own, in which their politics is all about that this country is a Muslim country. And as being a Muslim country, that is the only thing that's viable to work, since Islam in itself is a religion and a state. I mean, here we have the ideology of the Muslim Brothers, which states that here our traditions, our customs, our history is soaked in the idea of Islam and Islamic culture and Islamic politics. And in reality, they won the elections. They won the elections even during Mubarak time, when they came to the People's Assembly at the time, as called. After Mubarak, during the elections for the parliament in 2012, they won by about pluralism by about 40+%, and with the Salafis and others, they exceeded 70% of the parliament. Also, when there was a presidential elections, they won. Morsi won. People might doubt that, but that's, the end result was that they won. Then their perception of what happened is really what it was a break with what is legitimate and what is religiously blessed. And as such, what happened in the June 30th is illegal, and as such, until today, what we have of a kind of a resistance from the people in using violence, because the army is using violence. They are having 3 operations. We can find them in this story. It starts from the Rabaa one, in which, you know, the human rights organization and Watch in the United States got a report, is considered the Bible of this story. What happened in Rabaa. And looking at it as if it is Tiananmen Square in China. And as such, there is about 837 people that was killed in that one. The propaganda machine of this story is that the army is the enemy and all what it says are fake. And its accomplishments are not credible. I mean, if we made a content analysis of the TV channels of مكملين, الشرق, العربي الجديد, all the tools of the Muslim Brothers, we will find that whatever it is done, it is not credible, and whatever it is said, it is fake. By the way, the word fake now, it could be accredited to President Trump, because he put it into the political vocabulary of all of us. So the story of Rabaa is al-Mazlumiyya, as they call it, which I don't know what is the English right word for it. Salmawi, help me here, how you can translate Mazlumiyya. Anyway, it is the oppressed, or those who are being victimized. So that is the 3 stories that might, you put them together, you got the real story of, if anything can be real story about Egypt and what it is now, which is the election that we will start tomorrow. I will put here a number of points. Number 1 is that the revolution, or the age of revolution, is not over yet. I mean, the fact that Egypt is still into that kind of moment that in which the element of people is introduced to the public domain and into the politics of the country, it is there. It is there either that they are already there by themselves, or through the whole modern types of media, or being there by fear of them. I mean, the element when we have the president that what happened before shouldn't happen again. I mean, that's something that element of people in the streets is becoming something that got to be calculated and accounted for. So that is a point that's affecting the entire issue of elections. Is the president is necessary to be the protector of the country for that kind of decline that happened and the disaster that affected the country for 7 years, or he is not the one to do it? It is a very critical moment in the history of the country, in a sense that it is not the voting process that is going on here. It is about how much trust you put into a person, because we don't have elections. In a sense, the civil society, or parties and others, failed completely to produce credible candidates. And when, here, if I move to the second story, the Republic of Fear, say because they're afraid. I see that, the kind of candidates who got afraid of what we have is really they are not serious candidates. I mean, if we compare Egypt to other candidates in other countries are more tougher than the ones we have. So here, the issue is not at all related to the regular kind of voting. It is about how to evaluate which one of these stories you belong to. If you are really lived the first story, you got a lot of hope, a lot of feeling that it is something that we might try. There is a beginning after all, and there are numbers for it. Or you think that that's squashing the freedom of the Egyptian people, which they came out in January calling for it. By the way, and that's something I'm interfering here into the narrative, is that the story that we have in the West in particular is a story over 3 days, between January 25th to January 28th. After January 28th, the Muslim Brothers took over. Burning of police station happened, of the NDP headquarters happened, and the killing of many civilians happened. So if you belong to that one, you will say that actually we are into the same kind of danger. If you belong to the second one, you will find also fear that we didn't advance one bit after where we were in 2011. Before that, it came back again. I mean, that's a story. In my opinion, and I'm here interfering again, that not the idea that people are out and can get out when they are in no army and no security apparatus can do anything with 100,000 people on the street. Zero. And the experience we got here in Egypt was that once we have 100,000, they determine how the events will go. So here the good news is that we have the numbers that are good, and Egypt and the region are gradually stabilizing. I mean, note here that the change that happened in Egypt in June 30th, 2013, with the first contraction of the politically religious wave. The beginning was there, and then the second one was the defeat of ISIS at the end of last year. So now the region is somehow cooling off, stabilizing. Still terrorism is there, the fear is there, yet it is not the situation we were in 2014 or 2015. The price was big. I mean, we had at least estimate is about no less than 1 million killed in the region on the Arab Spring, and about 3-4 million wounded, and 14 million people either refugees or displaced. So the price was really high in the region, and to some extent in Egypt, particularly in the first 4 years after 2011. In terms of infrastructure was almost nil in terms of its development, and all other indicators was Egypt growth rate was about 1.8 at the time. So we have this kind of look, and I will leave it to you if you want to ask more, but I want to give a sentence or two on the coming term. The coming 4 years. I think the biggest dilemma now for, President Sisi will win. I mean, I'm not seeing any news. I mean, people might look at how much people will attend. Will it be big? Will it be small? I don't think it will exceed what happened last time. And it is understandable, actually, if we have about 30% of those eligible for voting, that will be a score, because the competition almost non-existent. And also because of, Egyptians are not good at good voting. I mean, it happened only twice when Egyptians exceeded 50%. One in 1950, when they brought the left back, but all the elections since 1924, in which modern age, were on the 30% to 40%. For only a time we exceeded the 50%, actually it was 60%, and never it was broken. That number was 1915. Again in 1912, in which we have between Morsi and Shafiq, the attendance or the voting was exceeding about 51%. I don't think we will reach that number, nor the number of the president last time, which was 47%. I don't think that will be, taken over. However, I guess there is an understanding now that you make your choice, about the stories. But if you took the first story, there is a realization that the absence of politics is making a difference. It is making a difference inside the country, and it's making a difference outside the country. Outside the country, it, but inside the country, there is that kind of, look, what will happen exactly? Are we going to have another term and that's it? Or will be more terms? Do we have, American-style democracy in which after the American Revolution and the chaos that happened after the Revolution, they choose a man with a name called George Washington twice in a complete consensual kind of voting. There wasn't any competition. And, or it will be a kind of a Putin or Xi, whatever, Jing, what, in China, here in which we will have something that might continue for more time. That is a choice. I don't think that the Egyptians want it. I don't want it. And I think that, attempts to change that will not be acceptable if it happens. And I don't think it will be put to the table in the same time, because there was an attempt to do that earlier, and fortunately the president said that he will not do it. And he actually voted publicly against any amendment to the Constitution. I hope I'm not putting you into more perplexing kind of look at the Egyptian scene than we started this talk. And thank you very much.